Welcome back. Thank you very much for staying with us here on SABC News. You're watching SA Today with me, Flo Ledwaba. The South African government has appealed to all military groups in Afghanistan to ensure the rule of law and the protection of all human rights. This follows reports of the exodus of people out of Afghanistan after the Taliban's takeover over the weekend. There was increased traffic at the Pakistani-Afghan border. Pakistan closed the Torkham crossing on Sunday as the Afghan side of the border came under Taliban control. Authorities say they wanted peace and stability for trade, irrespective of which government rules Afghanistan. Taliban insurgents took control of the presidential palace in Kabul as US-led forces departed and Western nations scrambled yesterday to evacuate their citizens. President Ashraf Ghani fled the country on Sunday as the militants entered Kabul virtually unopposed, saying he wanted to avoid bloodshed. All right, let's take this discussion further then. Now we bring in Brenthurst Foundation Director, Dr. Greg Mills. A very good afternoon to you, Doctor. Thanks so very much for being with us here on SABC News.
Thank you, Flo.
All right, well, before we get into it, I do understand that you've just actually returned from Afghanistan, so no better person to really tell us what the situation is like there. Talk to us about really what was happening the time that you've been there.
Well, I've been there a couple of times this year. I returned there from Afghanistan, from Kabul, little on a month ago. So already then the situation was deteriorating. The situation in Kabul had a sense of foreboding. It was something akin to the Alamo even a month back. And I think the pace, however, of events over the last month has just been extraordinary. That basically the Afghan military essentially gave up fighting. And the Taliban, created something of a snowball effect and essentially took over all of the provincial capitals and then Kabul over the weekend without very much of a struggle at all. So I think everybody was shocked as to how quickly this happened. And one day on Friday, I think it was, or Saturday morning, President Ghani was talking about consolidating his military forces. On the Sunday, he was on a helicopter and he was gone.
Yeah.
So such was the pace of events. And now, of course, we all wait and see as to what sort of Taliban government this is going to be. Is this going to be the Taliban version 2.0, a different sort, a more moderate, liberal element which allows women full participation in the economy, which recognizes human rights and tolerates difference? Or is this going to be the version 1.0, which ruled Afghanistan between 1996 and 2001, which of course gave support and provided succor to Al-Qaeda, which led to the invasion after 2001 and the last 20 years which unfolded.
Yeah, and interestingly, as you talk about, what kind of government this will be, the Taliban has, of course, declared victory after the Afghan president fled and his government collapsed. And, now I hear that the Taliban leader is in the capital for talks. What would be the makeup of these sort of talks be? I mean, to me, a coup is a coup. One would assume that we're done talking, but obviously, in terms of you talking about making up of this government, one wonders then what these talks would really be essentially then about.
Well, essentially they're surrender talks, and it's a question of, the government is in no position to apply conditions because it's essentially imploded. So this would be about, I think, firstly about humanitarian issues, about humanitarian access, whether the government will allow those to leave who want to leave, whether it will respect human rights and former government officials, whether it will allow people, who have an exit visa to be able to go and live somewhere else. And then, of course, very much it's going to depend on the tone and nature of the Taliban government. Do they want to be inclusive? They're talking about being very different to the past, but do they want to be inclusive? Because that's going to shape the level of international legitimacy that they enjoy. And that's going to shape the degree to which they're going to be able to acquire funding from abroad. And I don't think that anybody in the region particularly wants a radical government, the sort that we saw between 2001 and 1996, not least Iran and certainly not the stands in India and China. Pakistan, of course, has its own agenda, but nobody wants to see a sort of an implosion within Afghanistan. So that's going to be a key part of the talks, which is how to keep government going, how to keep funds coming in, and how to let people who want to go out.
Yeah. The US president has, of course, now come out defending what's been called the messy pull out from Afghanistan. Is this an embarrassing situation for the US, which obviously prides itself in being a world leader, having the world's best army, intelligence, etc.? Or, was the move made by President Joe Biden a good one, given the situation that was unfolding?
I think the simple answer to the last part of your question is no. That decision essentially was always had a degree of concern about a sort of high-speed Saigon-type collapse. And what we've got is a collapse much faster than that which happened in South Vietnam, and all those images of people leaving the airports and helicopters off the roof that one thought, imagined that you'd never see in a modern age. These, of course, are now reoccurring, and these pitiful scenes at Kabul airport of people trying to get out of the country. This is part and parcel of this. So I think the big question is, what is the damage to America's geopolitical interests and aspirations? What's the damage to its counterterrorism strategy, which is why they were in Afghanistan in the first instance? And what is the damage to its moral authority in the world? When you essentially made peace, as President Trump did, and then carried out by President Biden, with your enemy and not including your ally. That's not a particularly good message for other allies around the world. So there's a lot of catch-up, a lot of patching up that I think the United States will have to do. It remains to be seen how they will remain engaged with both Afghanistan and the region. That we'll just have to wait and see, just as we'll have to wait and see what version of Taliban government this turns out to be.
Yeah. Are we now looking at possibly another huge humanitarian crisis, not as though there aren't enough in the world as is? In a situation like this, of course, where there is conflict, where there is unrest, where there's been a coup, such as the situation now, you will obviously have people who are then displaced, and some looking to European countries, for example. And, some of these European countries will say, look, we can't absorb people that are fleeing conflict in their country. So are we at this stage sort of preparing to see yet another humanitarian crisis?
I was in Afghanistan in July with President Olusegun Obasanjo, my boss, and he had a very simple line about the conflict. He said the world really doesn't need another war. And we need to find ways to deal with war and end war and work together as regions to make sure we put the conditions in place. And what we had come out of the 1980s and the Soviet period, when they invaded between 79 and 89 Afghanistan, was 4 million refugees in Pakistan. Of course, Afghanistan's population has virtually doubled since that time. Pakistan's population has more than doubled since that time, and Pakistan's population has gone from 140 million people at the start of this century to nearly 220 million people in just 20 years. So they have all sorts of domestic pressures, and to absorb large refugee flows, which I think are almost guaranteed out of this, not just into Pakistan, but all over the region, I think will be place tremendous strains on them. And then, of course, that'll depend of how long those people stay there, how much international support there are for those individuals in those camps. The conditions in which they operated in the 80s and 90s was very, very stark and harsh. And whether the West and all the countries that participated in this war then feel a moral obligation to take large numbers of these refugees, not just the interpreters, not just those who fought with the Americans and others in Afghanistan, not just the most vulnerable, but actually people whose hopes have been dashed by the manner of this exit today, after 20 years of instigating and catalyzing hope in the country. And I think only of what tremendous change there's going to be for women in Afghanistan now, and the dramatic negative, regressive change on their lives as a consequence of these events of the last few weeks.
Dr. Mills, thanks very much for your input. Much appreciated here on SABC News, sir.
Thank you.